The voice of sharing during ASEAN.
Hey, good morning. Hi, this is Arlene. Today we have two guests here, and one is from Myanmar, and one is a Malaysian who have been working on Myanmar issue here. Today our topic is on the plights of the Rohingyans, and we have our guest YY Nu. She's the founder of the Women's Peace Network Arakan from Myanmar, and also Debbie Stothard. Did I mention it better? Well, she's the Secretary General of the International Federation for Human Rights, FIDH. So, first of all, welcome to the studio. Hi, how are you guys this morning?
Hi, good morning. Yep, we are fine. We had nasi lemak for breakfast, so we're all ready to go. We're ready to roll.
So, why Nu? Is this your first time in Malaysia, or you have been here several times?
Oh, it's my second time. Last year, I was here during the election.
Ah, okay.
It's kind of election watch.
Election watch. And you have tried nasi lemak before this, or this is also your first time?
This is first time. It's fantastic. it's looked like our Burmese urban breakfast.
Oh, really? Oh, we share a lot of, culture. It seems like actually Malaysia and other Southeast Asian countries share a lot of similar culture with each other. So,
Yeah.
anyways, first of all, can you introduce your organization, which is the Women's Peace Network? What is that?
Actually, it was formed after the violence happens in Arakan state last year, July. So we formed that organization to enhance and empower women from Rakhine State to build peace in Arakan mainly, and to protect and promote the rights of the women from marginalized community in Arakan State.
I see.
Yeah.
So, you, Debbie, you also have been working closely on this Rohingyan issue. How far back your involvement on this issue?
Well, I've been the active supporter for human rights and democracy in Burma since the national uprising in 1988, the August 8, 1988 uprising. And it became inevitable when you start working on human rights in Burma, you will definitely come across the situation of Rohingya, which is one of the most dangerous and challenging human rights situations in the country. There are many other ethnic minorities in the country who also face a lot of oppression and discrimination, including the Kachin, who are in a situation of war under attack by the Burmese military since June 2011 in the north of Burma. But Rohingya has suffered, I think, some of the worst atrocities simply because they have been so ignored for so many years, and the discrimination against them has been extremely systematic and widespread. So we've seen where a situation in 1982 where the new law, 1982 Citizenship Act, under the military regime, stripped Rohingya of their citizenship, so they became illegal in their own country. And that created a huge number of problems. And then that was worsened by discrimination to restrict marriage of Rohingya, to restrict the birth rate of Rohingya, to restrict their ability to even go from one village to another.
Oh, even from one village to another?
Yes, because they're illegal in their own state.
I see. So they are being rounded up, like, they only have to confine to their own areas. Is that the case?
Yeah, it's kind of open prison. For them
It's
without committing any crime.
It's like a concentration camp, something like that, is it?
Yeah, definitely.
So what is your personal experience? You live there and you...
Oh, yes. I was born in Arakan State, but then when I was 8, it's in 1993, I guess, after the 1919 election, we moved to Rangoon. But that time is started, during that time, the discriminations is openly starting. So when I was young, there was discrimination but it's not like that. But it's started from about 1993 to it's obviously from 1994. So I didn't have much experience by myself. This kind of serious discrimination, but still, when we are young, there was discriminations in schools.
What kind of discrimination was that?
If you're Muslim, if you're Rohingya, even the teachers, they are not treat you properly. They are not teach you properly, and also if you in the hospital, you will be scolded or something like that. Yeah,
I have friends who have worked in aid organizations and worked in Arakan or Arakan state. And this is even before the violence started in 2012. They themselves witnessed situations where even pregnant women, Rohingya women who were pregnant, were refused and who needed urgent assistance. For example, delivery. They were facing. In one case, this woman was facing severe pain and trauma because she was having a complicated labor, and the doctor refused to even let her enter the hospital.
Wow.
And yelled at her and called her an animal. So these foreigners had to find money to send her by boat and to pay a bribe to make sure that she could reach the Bangladesh site to get medical assistance, because she could not get treatment in her own area. And then we see that these cases are coming up very often, and so people are even afraid that if they go to a hospital, a general hospital or public hospital, and if they are allowed in, they might be intentionally killed or intentionally mistreated.
I see.
So we also have a huge problem because there's at least 60,000 Rohingya children who are not allowed to get birth certificates, and there's a very high rate amongst Rohingya children of not being able to go to school. So that discrimination is going as far as that. And if a Rohingya in a village wants to move to another village or travel for business or to see family, they have to pay fines or bribes at every checkpoint in order to be able to go from one place to another. So they're treated like some kind of illegal immigrant in their own country.
I see. There is the situation of being statelessness or illegal immigrants. What is the background of it?
Oh, so it, as I told, it started in after 1990s.
What happened during 1990s?
But before that, these people, the Rohingya, they are living in Arakan state since thousands of years ago. Even the Arakanese historian and history book mentions that, even in 15th century, there was there was a kingdom who has Muslim title, who had with the Muslim title. It's about 20 kingdom.
Wow, 20 kingdoms in the
20
past.
20 kings.
In a dynasty.
I see.
Yeah, we call it Miao dynasty. So since this time, we can see clearly that the influence of the Muslim in that area. If there is no Muslim in that area, why this Rakhine king need to have the Muslim title?
Yeah, that's true. So the history is far
And
back,
then,
right?
Yeah, again, the historian, the Western historian called Francis Buchanan, he mentioned in his research in 1779 about the Rohingya in Rakhine State as a how to say it, Mohammedan and believer who are Rohingya is the settler of the descendant of this Arakan. And also there are a lot of history has been gone, and even the Burmese government, and they recognize in officially, until 1982 in various version. It's like even the Burmese encyclopedia, which is produced by their state, it's mentioned that the people of Northern Arakan state, it's Rohingya. And also there was a video program, and since 1951 to 1961 to 64, which is the Rohingya Indigenous Broadcasting Program. Under the Indigenous People Broadcasting Program, Ethnic People Broadcasting Program of Burma, Rohingya was one of the group which have got the chance to broadcast in that area in during that period. So and also even now, in even now in the second year geographical book mentioned that in the university, official the how to say, it's the state's university's curriculum of the present days. It's mentioned that the people of the Northern Arakan state, the settlers of the Northern Arakan state, is the Rohingya. So the history says there are Rohingya, but then since 1992 they strip off the Rohingya citizenship rights, and then they taken away Rohingya dignity and taken away, identity and dignity, and then they taken away all the basic rights by introducing discriminatory rules and principles since 1990s. So these discriminations is happening. That's because of these discriminatory rules and practice introduced by the government.
I think the extent of the discrimination is to the point where Burmese have been the propaganda again to the Burmese public is that there is no such thing as Rohingya. So they keep saying no, they are Bengalis, they are illegal, they don't belong here. And I think the military regime, even from the 80s and 90s, realized that it was a very convenient way to be hateful against Rohingya in order to create a kind of a nationalism. So instead of every time there was unhappiness with the military dictatorship, there will be some kind of disturbance created targeting Rohingya or the Muslim community in general, or the ethnic Chinese community who have been there for a very long time in Burma, is to create more hatred and violence against them. So then the military can appear to be the hero, or the public dissatisfaction against the military is redirected.
So it's a way to create internal enemies to distract people from the real enemy.
Exactly. And after, in more recent years, we've seen the Rohingya, and then now, more recently, the general Muslim community targeted because there's been a huge influx of Chinese from mainland China, mainly people displaced by the Three Gorges Dam project, coming into Burma and acquiring local identity cards in Mandalay and the northern part of Burma. And the military, it's in the interest of the military and the current rulers of Burma, the ruling party, who to not to attack Chinese, to protect the Chinese, because they have very big interest, investment and financial connection, and also military connection to Beijing. So they are trying to avoid any dissatisfaction towards the Chinese community, and so they are focusing most of the hatred and the unhappiness of the local population against Rohingya, and then against Muslims in general. And we know the evidence for that is there's quite obvious evidence of that from the official statements of the government, and also that one of the most notorious people who have been using social media to cause incite hatred and violence towards Rohingya and Muslim is the director of the president's office.
I see. And what's the name of the director?
He's a colonel, and he uses the pen name online of Muzo.
He's quite internet savvy, I think.
Yes. So we could see before the massacres started in Arakan state in middle of 2012, 1 year leading up to that, he was already putting very inflammatory material online and creating all kinds of fear-mongering as though the country was going to be overrun by the Taliban, or the Muslims and the Rohingya were going to take over the country using weapons.
I see. I'm quite interested with the census because one of the main discrimination that Rohingyans face is they are stayed as the others in the census. So tell me more about this.
Oh, so the Burmese government give 135 code number for the so-called 135 ethnic people of Burma. For the other people who are not belong to that 135 recognized state-recognized list, register, have to put at the others category. And also there was 13 foreigners. Foreign country has code number. It's mean 13 foreign 13 foreign countries have code number. So if the foreigner who has no code number, they also have to put this under this category, others, which code number is 914. So it's mixed, foreigners and the citizens of Burma who are not belong to the 135 ethnic nationality. So for the Rohingya, some Rohingya politicians and political parties from Burma, they asked for the separate code number to avoid the, side effect of the census and the future, the
future of their tribe,
yeah,
right?
the future of their tribe. They try to ask for the separate code number, but the government didn't cooperate it. The government didn't. Give it, then the Rohingya has no choice. They have to put under the 914 others column. So let's put there. But the government say, even the ministry, immigration minister say, everyone has, according to the census law, everyone has right to put their own identity. Okay? But then, and also the immigration officers himself mentioned to the, in front of the international community, to the Rohingya, you can write whatever you like. It's your rights. It's according to the law. But while the census happened, there was local media report that the immigration officer said the Rohingya cannot, the term Rohingya are not allowed to put on the census. If they put as a Rohingya, they will be punished. They will get legal punishment. Some kinds, so that kinds of propaganda has been spread by the domestic media. Then there was a demonstrations by the Arakan in Arakan state,
when was that?
Arakan.
When was that?
It's before, just before a week ago.
Oh, okay.
In census. Then the Arakan state census committee issued a paper that there is no such things of Rohingya in our Arakan state, and we are not allowed to put Rohingya on the census. Then, if they put Rohingya, they will get punishment. So then finally, the census came to Arakan, and then while Rohingyas say we are Rohingya, then they go back. They didn't take census.
I see.
So there is 2 months left. We don't know what will happen. Until now, the government say, no, you're not allowed.
What's very disappointing and concerning about this census is that this is the first census held in Burma for many decades, about 50 years. There hasn't been 30 years. There hasn't been a census.
So that means the census is one of the way for Myanmar government to transit towards democracy. Is that the case?
Because there is an expectation that the census will be the basis of the next year's general election in terms of understanding what the voter population is like and understanding the demographics of the country. What is of great concern is the fact that Rohingya have not been allowed to identify themselves as Rohingya, and they are being forced to identify themselves as Bengali. And the rhetoric around this is that traditionally that they are illegal Bengali immigrants who should be deported. So, of course, people are very afraid, Rohingyas are very afraid that if they are forced to identify themselves as Bengali, then they will be kicked out of the country, or at the very least not allowed to participate in the elections. Because there's also been discussion at the parliament about some kind of proportional representation in the country according to ethnic identity, or according to there is a possibility for that to happen. And so there's been a push and a concern that people are being forced to identify themselves in a way that they will not be participating or represented in the parliament. So this is why the census is particularly important at this time in the country. Of equal concern, is also the fact that Burmese Muslims or Myanmar Muslims are now told that they cannot write themselves as Myanmar Muslim. If they wish to be known as Muslim, they must choose to be identified as Bengali Muslim, Pakistani Muslim, or Indian Muslim, because the discrimination, the systematic discriminatory policy is such that there's no such thing as a Burmese or a Myanmar ethnic person who will become a Muslim. If you really want to be a Burman, you have to be a Buddhist or a Christian. So this is the kind of discrimination which is going on. And
but why particular discrimination towards Muslim or Rohingya?
I think Arakan state is a state that is rich in natural resources, but very poor in terms of local development. So it's been easy to pitch one community against the other. And also, I think there has been a strong tradition of racism towards people who look South Asian. And I think that's also something that we've seen in the past in Malaysia.
I see, yeah, that's kind of true also. You were house arrested before, when you were younger, right? Share that experience.
Oh yeah, it's not house arrest.
You were jail.
Yeah, it was jail.
So it was a real jail.
Yes,
I see.
Of course. So so at the time I was 18, and I was arrested with my whole family together with my father. That's just because of my father's involvement in Burmese democratization. He was an MP in 1919 election. Later on, he made alliance with the Aung San Suu Kyi, and he became a member of CRPP. Out of 18 members, when the government tried to break down that committee, my father and some other members from that committee were arrested. But for my father, because we are Rohingya, he was arrested with his whole family members, including me.
Wow.
I was, in Burma, 18 years old we regard as a child. We don't know anything, just a kid for family. But I was jailed for sentenced for 19 years. And I have to live there for 7 years. After 7 years, we got presidential amnesty for the political prisoners in 2012, January. And I was released that time.
How was life in prison when you are such a young person, you know?
Yeah, it was terrible. Actually,
This was actually the notorious insane prison where many high-profile political activists were jailed. And it was also the jail in which Aung San Suu Kyi was kept in 2003. So it was really tough for even a seasoned activist, let alone an 18-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Actually, the insane prison, which is located in Rangoon, it's the most notorious prison, even in the Southeast Asia, which is built by the British colonial, and it has very lots of famous stories, prosecutions inside the prison. But still, we don't have physical abuses today, but we still have some mental abuse and some sort of small kind of physical abuses as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't faced any physical abuse during imprisonment or during the trial, but we have been faced many mental abuse by the prison authorities, by the police. Yeah.
Debbie, you've been to Arakan State before, right?
No, I don't think I'm allowed to go.
You're not allowed?
I've been denounced as a traitor for taking a stand on Rohingya human rights.
I see. I'm just wondering, like, what is the current state of the Arakan people right now? How they live their lives, you know, as in like their daily lives?
I think from a foreigner's point of view, as someone who has been following the human rights situation for more than 25 years, there's something we need to be aware of. It is, if you are a Muslim, especially if you're a Rohingya in Arakan State and other parts of Burma, but definitely in Rakhine State at this time, it is a situation of very high insecurity. You could be killed without anyone without any protection from the police. If you are in trouble and you go to the police, they might be the ones who are also attacking you or promoting violence against you. So now we have a situation where Rohingya are hated. They are mistreated if they try to get help from the authorities or try to get help from the health authorities or the legal authorities like the police, the law enforcement authorities. Many Rohingya whose villages were burnt and who were attacked have been rounded up and kept in essentially what is a concentration camp, because these camps are kept far away from towns and are in areas which are very vulnerable to cyclone. And now, in the month of last month, there have been increased attacks on NGOs, including international and UN agencies, providing humanitarian assistance to the camps of internally displaced people in Arakan State. And so there's a urgent crisis where food is starting to run out. Even basic necessities like drinkable water is starting to run out, and there has been no medicine or medical assistance to over 100,000, nearly 150,000 IDPs who are mostly Rohingyas and Muslims.
I see.
So we have even about 1,000 Rohingyas who were enrolled in university who cannot continue their university education, and the UN has already expressed concern for tens of thousands of school-going Rohingya kids who have not been allowed to go to school because they're locked up in camps. So what is also very disturbing is the fact that there seems to be a pattern of young Rohingya women disappearing. And there have been already reports that many young Rohingya women have been abducted by the military and kept confined in military camps to become the sex slaves of soldiers. So we really have this situation of, it's very strange to have this situation, because as a Malaysian, you have a reasonable expectation. If someone commits a crime against you, you can go to the police and complain. If someone from the authorities does something bad against you, you feel quite brave enough to go to the media or go to the court and complain about it. But if you're a Rohingya in Rakhine State, basically you have nowhere to go and you have no power at all to protect yourself. And that's a really scary situation to be in. And people are facing the threat and fear of being killed anytime. And we've seen this pattern every few months. There is some kind of riot over some trivial or very random
Yeah, like
event.
recently because of one Buddhist flag, mishandled by the aid workers, and it caused a huge riot, a mob even.
The mob attacks against one aid organization was because the head of that organization took away the Buddhist flag. That was, someone put a Buddhist flag in their office window, and she decided that they are not a religious organization, so they didn't want any religious items to be displayed. So she moved it away. As the manager of the organization, she had a right to do that, but that became the catalyst for stoning and threats and threatening of aid workers, and so it spread to all the other UN officers and other aid officers. So we have this. The local people have been told that these foreigners are helping the Rohingya and are collaborators with the Rohingya, so therefore they must be kicked out of the country. We even had a situation in the past few months where the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar his life was threatened by mobs. And we know that these mobs exist and are well organized and have the freedom to act because the national authorities do not want to intervene. Actually, the ruling party and the president himself have benefited from the anti-Muslim hatred and violence. Even in a state like Arakan now, Aung San Suu Kyi is now hated and being portrayed as pro-Muslim, and Thein Sein, General Thein Sein, the president, is now the person who is the most popular politician in the state, because he's seen to be getting rid of Rohingya and endorsing discrimination against Rohingya and Muslims.
I see. You want to add something?
Yeah. So current situation, I just want to highlight some current situations, difficulties faced by Rohingya in Arakan state. So after the NGO kicked it out from the Rakhine state, so there was very few NGO. There is very few NGO left in Arakan state, but a lot of people, especially IDPs, who are facing many humanitarian and difficulties. So women and children are dying every day, lack of food and water and medical health care. So, and it's become very critical and serious situations because it's become scarce of food and water, and also there is no such hospital or clinic for the IDPs. So there is only one hospital in Situate capital, but the Rohingya whoever go to the hospital, they were dead in hospital or they were mistreated in the hospital. So it seems there is no hospital to go for the Rohingya.
I see. So they are left to treat their own wounds or their own
So
sufferings.
So it's the questions of the existence of the people, on the earth. So, what I request to everyone is, it's very humanitarian agency situations facing by the Rohingya currently. So everyone has to give attention on it. And the security, as Debbie mentioned, there is no security at all. So the perpetrators, especially authority, security apparatus, and the Arakan people got impunity to perpetrate to the Rohingya. They can do everything they like. There is no accountability.
And I remember yesterday's forum at the Global Movement of Moderates, you refer to this conflict as not just a conflict, but it's a genocide. And because of that, I'm just wondering, like, what contributes to this, to the escalation of this situation?
Okay. Actually, everyone should go look up the Convention on the Prevention of Genocide, because it's one of the shortest international conventions that you can read. And in 2006, I'm the coordinator and founder of ASEAN Burma, the alternative ASEAN network on Burma. And in 2006, ASEAN actually put out a briefer that described the situation of the Rohingya as a slow-burning genocide. Because if you look at the convention, you will see that restrictions on marriage and childbirth, trying to prevent people from reproducing, is part of that convention. It's one of the definitions of genocide. For a long time, we didn't use the G word. We didn't use genocide because everyone thinks of the mass genocide of 5 million people in Rwanda, which is 20 years ago. We've just had 20th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide. But I think when we see the escalation in this way, where there's clearly a policy and practices by the authorities and the propaganda that's supported by the authorities, it points towards supporting violence and mass killing against Rohingya and other Muslims, then we can already see this is clearly a genocide-like situation. We have a situation where local Buddhists who, if they are in an area where there are Muslims living nearby or Rohingya living nearby, they are convinced by the propaganda that the Rohingyas are going to come and kill them anytime, so they have to kill the Rohingya first. So, this kind of thing is the situation which is very similar to other mass killings and genocide situations in other parts of the world and other times of history. So we can see that. We can see that the authorities are perpetuating a very widespread and systematic discrimination, both in policy, in law, and in practice. So if people are being, and they are not punishing the ones who are killing the Rohingya.
I see.
They are not allowing investigations to take place. They keep denying that killings have happened. So we have a very strange situation in a village called Duchiyatan, where the Rohingya and Muslim community, the Rohingya community has essentially disappeared after violence in January. And there were 2 bogus investigations conducted by the authorities. And they said that there's no evidence of mass killing. We don't see any bodies. We don't know where they are. They just left the area. But there was a policeman killed, but we don't have his body. So they can't find the body of the policeman, but they confirmed that he's killed. And then they said that all these other people weren't killed because they can't find the bodies either. But when Medicine Sans Frontier confirmed that they had treated 25, at least more than 20 people from that area for injuries that were consistent with this kind of violence, then MSF was kicked out of the country. And then later they were allowed to return, but they are still not allowed to work in Arakan state.
You mentioned that Arakan is a is rich in natural resources. Sorry about that. Just wondering, like, is economy or economic interest is part of the contribution towards the escalation of the violence?
Good question. Actually, one of the things that's quite clear is that conveniently, all of these violence in the main areas, where most of the areas where big violence has happened targeting Rohingya, has been areas which have then been grabbed, where the land is confiscated and used for very profitable development projects. So in Chao Pyu in Rambri Island, for example, the riot started when Rakhine killed another Rakhine man because he sold rice to Rohingya. And then they went and proceeded and burned down the entire Muslim neighborhood and started killing people. It was a very horrible situation. It was one of the worst cases of massacre that we were able to get documentation on. And after that, both the Rakhine and the surviving Rohingya were moved out of that area, and that area is now being developed into a mini Singapore.
Oh, mini Singapore! I wonder
this is
how
like
it looks like.
Special economic zone where they are going to make.
What's the name of the place?
It's Chao Pyu.
Chao Pyu.
Yeah, in Rambri Island. It's in Arakan state, and that's where the gas pipelines, the dual natural gas and oil pipelines will hit land and move through Burma. Have already moved through built across Burma to pump oil and natural gas to Yunnan province in southwest China.
So are you also referring that China has strong interest?
Oh, definitely.
On this area?
Actually, it's not just China, it's other ASEAN countries and economies, including Singapore, who are benefiting from this racist violence. And what we've also seen that are quite concerning is that moderate Buddhists and moderate Rakhines who have provided assistance to Rohingya in situations of urgent need are also being targeted by mobs and being persecuted and publicly humiliated for helping Muslims. So I think this is very consistent with other situations of genocide in other parts of the world.
Yeah, explain more about the geopolitical interests of ASEAN countries on this particular area, especially you mentioned Singapore.
There have been Singaporean companies engaged in this is what's called the Shui Gas project. There have been Singaporean companies, but also what we're concerned about is that in other parts of Arakan state, for example in Sittwe, there's been a big government plan to develop former Rohingya neighborhoods into shopping centers and office blocks, and that is they're seeking investment from ASEAN countries and other neighboring countries to do that development. And then in Tandwe or Sandwe in last September, the riots started when the Buddhist stabbed a 90-year-old or 91-year-old Muslim woman, and that whole area then became a target for mass killings and burning of Muslim homes. And in that area is a special junction. That area is going to have an infrastructure junction for communications and roadways. So you can already see what was really scary too is that in another part of the country, in Mektila, where a year ago children from a madrasa were publicly executed, where people were beheaded and burnt in public in front of the police.
Wow.
The Muslim area has been taken over, and now they're going to build some bus station or some shopping center there. So we could already see that a lot of these development projects where the authorities and the government are trying to attract foreign investors, those areas are in places where the land was grabbed through racist violence.
They have been forcefully grabbed, and now it's being economically developed to something else, more commercialized.
Yeah, you can see that clearly because there has been no resettlement plan is going by the government for the refugees, for the IDPs. So it's very obvious that the plan is.
So what about the reaction of the international community on this? Are they keeping silence, or they are just, just go with the flow,
I think I think because I've been doing a lot of international advocacy on human rights in Burma, and more recently, much more focus on the advocacy on human rights situation and protection of Rohingya since the violence broke out, it's deeply disappointing. When you see a situation where UN, Muslim workers of international NGOs are jailed because they are Muslim and accused of giving out information about atrocities against Rohingya, and the international community is just making their usual statements without putting sanctions or additional pressure. When you see in March, and scores of INGOs and UN agencies been kicked out and threatened out of Arakan state without any protection by the national authorities, then you already start to ask some questions. Like, if this was happening in another country, all the member states of the UN will be making the biggest noise possible and condemning. But at the moment, everyone's kind of drunk on this idea. They're kind of a little bit drunk, I would say, on this idea that Burma is reforming, so we mustn't criticize too much, and we should give the authorities time to change. And I've been hearing this mantra of give them time, and I said, what more time do you want to give them? In the time that you have given them, they have allowed mass killings and genocide-like situation to occur in Arakan state. They have launched a new war in Kachin state, and they are committing war crimes in Kachin state. So how much more honeymoon are you going to give to these people to commit all these atrocities? And so, it's been really an uphill task to say, put your money where your mouth is, instead of saying, oh, this is very sad and we don't like it and please do something about it, and then continuing to have a business relationship with the regime. Then, of course, the regime and the authorities say, well, they have to make their official statement, but they're just really interested in business. So, we will continue to make the money that we want. So we need to actually start taking it quite seriously and say, hey, if you're going to invest in Burma, please make sure that you're not investing and benefiting financially off the blood of people who have been massacred. Please make sure that these massacres don't happen again. You need to be able to ensure that the government gives guarantees that people who commit mass atrocities are going to be punished, that you are going to change the laws. I mean, last month I was in Paris at a seminar on responsible investment in Burma, held at the French Senate. And there were people in the audience who said that they had planned to go to Burma to set up social businesses. And they were told, if you're going to set up a business in Myanmar, do not hire Muslims. So we are from ASEAN countries where there are Muslims in every ASEAN country, and some of the ASEAN countries like Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia are predominantly Muslim. How are we going to go and do business in Burma without being aware and being concerned about the discrimination and the killings, the genocide-like condition that's being perpetrated there? We have denounced the genocide in Bosnia. We've denounced genocide in Rwanda, but then we're keeping quiet about what could well turn out to be a genocide in Burma.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to say international community must be aware of is the Burma is really going to change into the democracy or elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So their support, must be for the democratic change. So they must watch the situation very carefully. If not going to change to the democracy, they need to change their mind. And then, so it's very obvious that we have serious human rights violations. It's ongoing crimes against humanity. It's ongoing in Arakan state, in Kachin state, and other ethnic area in Burma. And also we have still repressions of freedom of speech, and persecutions of the activists, democratic activists, and lots of human rights violations is ongoing. So while they are, communicating with the Burmese government, they need to look at the ground situation, grassroots situations. It's very important for their coordinations with the Burmese government.
And this year, we'll be having, this year, Myanmar is the host for the ASEAN Summit. And we all know the theme of the ASEAN Summit is people-centered ASEAN. And I'm just thinking, how much involvement ASEAN countries has been in the issues and conflict of the Rohingyans.
I think ASEAN has been well aware of the discrimination and the atrocities against Rohingya for many decades now, and even Abdullah Badawi Patla, our former Prime Minister, had made statements in the 1990s while he was Foreign Minister. Concerning the situation of Rohingya. At that time in the 1990s, there were 250,000 Rohingya refugees in camps in Bangladesh, and they were eventually pushed back into Burma. So I think we can see quite clearly that ASEAN was well aware. Even before Burma joined ASEAN in 1997, organizations such as mine were already making a lot of noise, saying, what are you doing by allowing these guys into ASEAN when they're mistreating Rohingya and other people so badly? The human rights situation, the violations are very serious. And even Dr. Mahathir, our Prime Minister at the time, kept saying, don't worry, they will improve their situation when they're in ASEAN. And he was hoping to be able to boast that there were reforms in Burma simply because Burma joined ASEAN. Actually, the situation got much worse. There were more people displaced in more parts of the country, and Burma actually increased its drug production and trafficking into ASEAN countries. So we had this very strange situation, and we kept saying, hey, what about the Rohingya? What about the Kachin? What about the Karen? What about all these other people who are being jailed and being persecuted and being civilians who are being attacked by the military? And ASEAN kept a kind of they would just say, oh, that's an internal matter, or we have to deal with this diplomatically and slowly, or if we don't deal with Burma, then China will take everything. And those were the justifications. And it was ASEAN that protected the military regime whenever it committed human rights violations. So I think part of this crisis, if we talk about responsibility, of course, yes, the military, the authorities, the racists, the extremist groups that are being supported by the government are responsible for this violence. But ASEAN actually made it much easier for them to do it. And it's time that ASEAN took a stand. If they're talking about an ASEAN community in 2015, this is not the community we need. If we're talking about people-centered ASEAN, then we have to acknowledge Rohingya are people too.
And ASEAN has set up the ICHR, which is called the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. How much of this commission can actually solve the issue of Rohingya, in your opinion?
The ICHR has a terms of reference that is now going to be reviewed in this year, but previously it did have some basic powers which the ICHR refused to exercise. They even refused to be transparent about what work they're doing. And this is also because ICHR itself was not set up to be an independent agency. All the national representatives of ICHR are selected by individual ASEAN states. So therefore, Burma or Myanmar chose somebody that will support the government's policies. and government agenda. And that means if the official position of the authorities, the regime in Burma, is to be discriminatory against Rohingya and Muslims, then clearly the Aicha representative has to implement and uphold that policy. So at this point, everyone has come to the sad realization that Aicha is extremely limited because they are not independent, and the selection of Aicha representatives are not on the basis of their background in human rights or their willingness to speak up or investigate human rights abuses.
In your opinion, why Aicha is being structured not to be able to, solve human rights violations, especially, like extreme human rights violation in the case of Rohingya? Is it really, they are being totally limited, or they are able to do so if they want to?
I think it's going to depend on the leadership, the political leadership of individual ASEAN states, whether they're willing to let Aicha be a more independent organization that is consistent with international practice. At this point, Aicha does not meet the Paris Principles, which are the international standards of what constitutes an independent and effective human rights institution. So if they don't meet that criteria, then we cannot hope too much from that. I think Aicha, in some ways, there was a cynical move to set up Aicha. The human rights community in this region had fought for and campaigned for decades to have a regional human rights mechanism. And then when it was eventually formed, it seemed to be developed as a way to prevent and discourage international human rights mechanisms such as the UN Human Rights Council from being more active on the region. So they say, well, you have a regional process, so let's deal with it at the regional level. No need to go international. But now we've seen, after active engagement by civil society groups and human rights organizations, that we still need to go to the UN because Aicha is not going to deal with us.
And why no? Your organization's Women's Peace Network, have your organization worked together with ASEAN to solve the Rohingya issue, or at least deliver the message to ASEAN?
Oh, yeah. So our organization have been working with some civil society organization from ASEAN, but it's not the state organizations.
So it's not the ASEAN Secretariat itself?
Yes. So we have delivered some of our message with other human rights organizations of ASEAN to the ASEAN member states. So regarding to Aicha, what I see is ASEAN itself, it has only economic interests, and their regional, human rights mechanism is protecting their power of each individual state and their interests of the individual state. It's not actually working for the human rights. So we cannot hope much from the Aicha. Even in this year, during the chairmanship of Myanmar, the Rohingya issues and other serious human rights violations issues are not allowed to discuss. So it's very clear that Aicha is not working for the human rights. It's just named as a, human rights organization.
I think for the human rights movement, supporting protection of Rohingya from atrocities and genocide or ethnic cleansing, we can already see that it's going to be extremely challenging to approach ASEAN as a body, especially when Burma or Myanmar chairs ASEAN this year. In fact, earlier this year, when there was a meeting of ministers in Naypyidaw, the capital, Burma actually gagged or censored ASEAN ministers from talking about the Rohingya issue and also talking about the crackdown on civil society in Cambodia. They said, no, you can't talk about this. And it's ridiculous. If they're censoring ministers, then of course civil society doesn't really have much of a hope.
We are just like peanuts.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of trying to get Weiwei Nu's message out, it's pretty clear that we have to get her message out to individual people, to influential people and influential organizations in individual ASEAN countries. Mm-hmm. You can't talk to ASEAN as a body because there's definitely big challenges in terms of getting ASEAN to shift, and we have to depend on friendly states, states that are concerned with what's going on to do their advocacy amongst their colleagues at the highest levels of ASEAN. Mm-hmm. It's kind of ironic that we've been able to reach ASEAN governments better through engaging with diplomats in New York and in Geneva rather than in Jakarta.
That's the irony. Maybe it's Geneva, that aura of human rights.
Well, the reality is that the ASEAN, the three pillars of ASEAN and the ASEAN plan of action all clearly embrace human rights and democracy as necessary for human security and political stability. They talk about people-centered ASEAN. The language is there. The question is the gap between language and actual implementation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be continue to be the struggle of the ASEAN human rights movement and civil society. And the situation of Rohingya is one of the most urgent and sharpest, most dangerous situations that we have to address within this context of ASEAN actually doing as it says it should be doing.
Yeah, that's true. Still a long way, but maybe ASEAN aside, what about individual actors within Myanmar, such as Aung San Suu Kyi and her party, the NLD?
Okay. I think in a way I feel a little bit sorry for Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD, because in Burma they have been targeted for taking a stand, for adopting the policy that they will only operate according to the bottom line is the international principles of human rights. But when they but in Burma, this is actually seen to be a fallback position to support Muslims. So as I said, in Arakan state, the NLD officers have been vandalized, NLD members have been put under pressure, and Aung San Suu Kyi has been vilified as being pro-Muslim. The extremist 969 movement, led by monk U Wiratu, has been protesting and demonstrating against Aung San Suu Kyi.
And these are radical monks.
Yeah, these are radical monks, not the good monks, the bad monks.
Very ethnocentric in a sense,
Yes.
and nationalist. Yeah, I guess I can equate it to Malaysians, Perkasa.
Yeah, probably. This is the Buddhist version of Prakasa. So they have been protesting and demonstrating against Aung San Suu Kyi to force her and her party to take an anti-Muslim position and to support the proposed marriage law to criminalize interfaith marriage. So we've seen this situation where Aung San Suu Kyi and her party are under a lot of pressure because they refuse to move away from international human rights principles, which means that everyone should enjoy their human rights, regardless of their religion or ethnic identity, and that's their position. They don't want to say the word Rohingya, because if you go to national parliament and say the word Rohingya, you're essentially committing political suicide.
But Aung San Suu Kyi has been refusing to use that word even among the international community, isn't it?
I think she is in a situation where she cannot use that word in public. She cannot use the word Rohingya in public. But I think we also need to understand too that Aung San Suu Kyi's support base has mainly poor urban and rural Burmese, and the ultra-nationalist movement that advocates fear and hate against Muslims are targeting her traditional support base. So we can see that there's also a political agenda. It's been very easy to reduce public support for the NLD, the National League for Democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi's party, by painting them as pro-Muslim and making the local people feel more nationalistic, that they have to vote for the ruling party because the ruling party is protecting them from being invaded by Muslims. So we have this kind of picture that's being drawn. And in the month of March, President Thein Sein and the Parliament, they formed a commission to actually accelerate several laws which will discriminate against Muslims and other religious minorities.
What are the laws? Can you mention it?
There's a law, a strange law called the Race and Religion Protection Law, which is actually to criminalize marriage of Buddhist women. These are to stop Buddhist women from marrying outside their religion. Mainly
is that the banning of interfaith marriage law?
Yes. So under this law, if you're a Buddhist woman and you want to marry a Muslim guy, for example, then you need to get official permission and the permission of your family.
It sounds very familiar.
Yes, but if you get married without permission, then both husband and wife will face a maximum jail term of 10 years.
Wow.
In some countries, that's the jail term for killing someone. There's also laws to restrict the political rights, the right to form a political party. Do you maybe Wei would want to talk about that?
Not in that proposed laws by the president. That's a separate agenda from the parliament. So for the race and religion protections law, there has been four law proposed to discuss and form a commission to discuss on that laws. That include the one race and religion protections law and law to control birth rate. And it has been going in the parliament, but it's not transparent. We didn't see any draft proposal, and the public, the people don't know what is that exactly.
You say the law controlling birth rate, meaning people can only have, is it like the one-child policy in China?
So we cannot say clearly what is that because we didn't see it. So it has no transparency at all. So it has been something proposed by the extremist groups and which support by the president himself. So it will come up. We heard it will come up during May. So we'll see.
Yeah. But when you talk about the birth rate law, then you already start to say, people start to get worried if you've been analyzing the situation in Burma. Because in Arakan state, Rohingya couples who want to get married need official permission to do so. And there's a restriction on the number of weddings that can take place in a year.
Really? To that extent?
Yes.
But the use.
And then when you get married, you have to sign a paper saying that you will not have more than 2 children. The 2-child limit is only imposed on Rohingya. And now there's been talk that the 2-child limit should be imposed on all Muslims.
So it has been happening since 1994 in Arakan state, restrictions of marriage and restrictions of birth rate. So they use quota system for each villages for each year. So let's say if you have 30 quota for this month in this village, then if you have more than 30 couple to marry, but then this extra couple have no permission to to get married. Then they become illegal.
I see.
So, and it's also very competitive because it might have more than 30 couple, right? Then if they want to get permission, they need to give bribery money to the to the authority. So then if you are rich, it's easier to get the permission. But if you cannot pay money, if you are poor, then it will be very difficult to get permission. So it has been suffering by the poor couple from Rohingya community since long times ago. Then if you get marriage without permission, you will have to get permission. You will get punishment, whether you have to pay fine or you have to go jail. Lots of couple has been jailed for the so-called illegal marriage, and also the restrictions of birth rate. It's going on since long time ago. It's not strange for us because since that times there is restrictions of birth rate, birth control. The Rohingya couple only can get 2 children. If you have more than 2 children, then these children are not listed in your family registration card. And they don't have any. They are not issued birth certificate, and they are not getting any basics facilities.
Yeah, so
they are not. They don't have right to go education, right to go school. They are not getting health services. They are not getting any basics need. These children, these kids, there are more than 60,000 in Rakhine State now.
Wow, that's how systematic it is when it comes to the discrimination. So they try to put a stop on the rights to receive basic needs.
Unfortunately, the restriction on rights to basic needs like education for Rohingya doesn't just happen in Rakhine State, Arakan State. It's happening in Malaysia.
Yeah, that's where we want to go and talk about more, which is on Malaysia. We have a huge number of people from Rohingya, from Arakan, coming to Malaysia as refugees, and you work with some of them, or a huge number of them. Explain more about it.
I think we have a really tragic situation in Malaysia because refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants, including undocumented migrants from Burma, in particular the Rohingya, have very few rights in this country. So we have a situation that Malaysia, by virtue of not being a signatory of the UN Convention on the Refugees, and simply by not being a very human rights focused government, we have a situation where children of refugees and migrant workers do not automatically have the right to go to school. So we are basically creating a situation where children of asylum seekers and migrant workers and migrants are essentially criminals in this country. There are a number of volunteer organizations that have informal schools and study centers so that the children have something to do. But there have been also cases where children have been arrested by the police for not having documents while they were on their way to go and attend these schools. And these schools are also, the locations of these schools are also very fragile because it's up to the discretion of the landlords about whether they want to rent an apartment or building to voluntary organizations and charitable organizations so that these children have a place to study and play. So I think it's quite tragic that when we talk about the systematic discrimination against Rohingya and other ethnic and religious minorities in Burma, that this systematic discrimination is also happening here. Malaysia really needs to stop criminalizing children and people who have been forced to flee their homes because of what basically ethnic cleansing and genocide-like conditions.
Yeah, and Malaysian government is at fault of this. One thing is we haven't ratified and signed the UN Convention on the Status of Refugee, and secondly, the Malaysian government is also actively, trying to create fear among all these refugee by having this group called Rela, or in Malay would be term as Ikatan Relawan Rakyat Malaysia. In English would be Volunteers of the Malaysian People. What do you think of this?
I think we really need to understand. Firstly, Malaysia needs to ratify the convention. But even when the various lawyers, the governmental legal advisors are talking about this, there's nothing to stop Malaysia from being a little bit decent and actually telling Rela, please do not persecute these children, please don't persecute these people. And also, there's nothing to stop the government from giving permission and legalizing these schools for refugee and migrant children. I don't think, you don't have to even sign the convention. It's just basic decency. I think also Malaysia has its own obligation as a signatory to the Child Rights Convention that they should actually be doing this anyway, even if they didn't sign the Refugee Convention. So while we feel, while it's encouraging to see that Malaysia is gradually taking a role to advocate for the protection of Rohingya people in Burma, they also need to clean up at home and make sure that while they're advocating for the rights of Rohingya in Burma, they should at least give the most basic access to services and human rights for their children and for refugees. I mean, if we really want to rebuild Burma, where there is a genuinely democratic and plural society, then we have to make sure that the Rohingya that are in Malaysia and in other ASEAN countries have the ability and the opportunity to educate themselves, and so that they are in a better position to rebuild their society in Burma.
And why you have a few recommendations and solutions for the Rohingya people, right? You mentioned quite a number of it.
Yeah. What I see is to solve the problem. The problem is itself created by the government of the Burma. So they must solve they need to solve the problem. And I think if they have a will to solve the solution, it's very easy. So firstly, they need to recognize the Rohingya identity and dignity of the Rohingya as a human being. And secondly, they need to give full, and they need to restore full and equal citizenship to the Rohingya where they had it in the past. And thirdly, they need to enforce rule of law. And there should be law enforcement, law and order in Arakan state, which has been serious human rights violations is happening. And they need to give equality they need to treat equally all citizens of the Burma, all people of the Burma. Then there will not be any problem. While we were equal in the past, there was no conflict. There was no problem. While people become, while there is inequality, while people become unequal, and at the same time, it's become lots of discriminations, and then it's become problem. So as I mentions, it's the recognitions of respect and dignity, recognitions of identity, and giving their citizenship, restore their citizenship rights, and law enforcement and law and order, and rule of law, and treat them equally to all people and respecting human rights and democracy, then there will not be any problem and any conflict in Burma. I believe that.
What about the corporate, the corporate sector and private people with private interests in Burma? What is your advice towards them as well?
So you mean for the civil societies?
As in for people or countries or even companies that want to invest in Burma, what can they do to contribute, towards the peaceful reconciliation?
So for us, as we are a developing country, we need to have lots of economic development, and our people in the ground are very poor. So let's say we are welcome for the foreign investment, but they need to have respect of human rights, and they need to do need assessment.
I think the reforms in Burma in the past 2-3 years has been focused on opening up the country to foreign investment, because the generals, the cronies, the state-owned enterprises all will make billions of dollars from the increased investment. And so that's where the reform has mostly been focused on. I think what we need to see is that investors, the corporate sector, especially from ASEAN countries, need to be much more, and also ASEAN governments themselves need to be much more strong on making sure that the legal reforms in Burma actually uphold international standards of rule of law. That means the laws have to be fair and to benefit everyone, not just a select elite. And that the law enforcement and the judiciary has to be independent and impartial according to the laws. So when we see what's going on in Burma, we can see that people can literally get away with murder if they are complying or they are upholding the discriminatory policies and laws and practices of the authorities. So we can see that clearly. And it's actually a very dangerous situation for businesses to go into, because while they may benefit of the victimization and the discrimination against ethnic and religious minorities, they themselves may face that discrimination further down the track. If there is impunity and there's lack of rule of law, there's no security of investment. That to be absolutely clear. So it's in the interest of the corporate sector and of international community to make sure there is a genuine law reform in the country, and that there is a level playing field, which means that people of all ethnic, national identities and religious backgrounds should have an equal and fair right to the natural resources of the country. That investment and the development that is taking place in Burma stops, because this type of investment is actually making people more vulnerable to violence and people poorer because they have been pushed off their land. So we need to actually change the situation around. Unless, if that doesn't happen, then investors run the risk of being implicated in serious international crimes. Investors also run the risk of being sued in international court or local courts years from now when there is eventually a genuine reform. So it's best for them to take a precautionary approach to make sure that what they do is responsible and benefits the local communities. And for that to happen, we need constitutional, legal, and institutional change in the country.
So
so I think they need to ensure that they are not victimizing local people, and the they must ensure that they are not violating the human rights, the rights of the local people. That's very important for the international cooperations and investment.
So, any last message before we, go offline?
I think this is the year that Burma is chairing ASEAN, and this is the year we really need to talk to Burma in clear and unequivocal language that things must change. You must not allow these mass atrocities to happen against Rohingya and other minorities in the country. It's time for Burma to clean up its act. If not, we are not going to have an integrated ASEAN community next year. Let's be frank about that.
So for me, I just want to say ASEAN community and ASEAN member states to see the Rohingya just as a human of the earth and just as a human of the ASEAN community and to treat as a human. And ASEAN member states, including Myanmar and Malaysia, must ensure the Rohingya rights are respected because we are also human.
Yeah, and so at the end of the day, this is
Thank
not
you.
just a Rohingya issue. This is an ASEAN issue because we are going towards the ASEAN Community 2015. Especially Malaysia will be the host of next year's ASEAN. So Malaysia also have to take this seriously, and this hopefully that ASEAN community will be a real people-centered ASEAN. So thank
Where
you.
we all
Yeah.
see the people.
Well, yeah. So anyway, thank you everyone. Thank you Wei Wei Nu, and thank you Debbie Stothard for coming to our studio and share your views and your concern regarding on the plights of the Rohingyans.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for inviting.